Hello, everyone. My name is Shafat Khan. My pronouns are he and him, and I'm delighted to be the moderator for this session and welcome you to the Ashoka Changemaker Summit 2021, the global yearly milestone to share cutting-edge ideas and connect with like-minded changemakers across the world. Now, this year's edition explores the concept of a new togetherness powered by the historical legacy of hundreds of community-led movements that have already recognized how togetherness has changed the world long before the global COVID-19 pandemic even hit. Now, for the next 45 minutes, we will explore the topic of young change-making as the new norm in our societies, systems, and institutions. There are 1.2 billion people between the ages of 15 and 24 across the world, or roughly 16% of the global population. And throughout our time, young people have led some of the biggest movements leading to social change, be that related to climate, racial equity, gender equity, and more. And in our opening panel of the Ashoka Changemaker Summit, we will be hearing from three incredible young changemakers about how we can support more young people to be agents of change in the systems that they are a part of. Now, members of the Ashoka community following us from Swapcard can share questions at the end of the session, and my colleague Daphne will pass them along to us, and we'll try to get to as many as we can and keep those questions coming. We also invite you to join the facilitated connecting session happening right at the end of this conversation, which will be facilitated by my colleague Ezgi, to connect with other community members passionate about the topic of young changemaking so that we can continue the reflection together and share our insights. And now, let me introduce you to the outstanding speakers who will help us navigate this topic. Firstly, I want to welcome Midria, who is a poet and social studies student at the University of Sao Paulo. She's one of the first Ashoka young changemakers in her country and co-founded Sam Us Perifa, which promotes a culture of marginal and peripheral literature through slam poetry. Next, we have Christian, who is an Ashoka young changemaker from the United States. He's the current student body president at Colorado State University and founded the Custodian Service Initiative, which celebrates the wisdom of custodians in his school and committed to create an ecosystem of love, dignity, and respect. And last but not least, we have Vinicius, or Vini, an Ashoka young changemaker from Brazil, who founded Cordel, a program which creates teaching and learning alternatives through gamification and playful experiences that combine entrepreneurship and education to teach young people about the SDGs. I'm so excited that you guys are joining us. And for my first question, I want to draw the experiences each of you have had in making positive change in your own communities. And they point to a new way to define what is most important in growing up. It is drawing people together around solutions. Now, if we close our eyes and imagine a day where the question all of us as young people, when we were young, consistently received, what do you want to be when you grow up? That question vanishes. And we instead start asking, what problem are you working to solve? Now, Midri, I want to start with you. What do you think needs to shift in our systems in order to make this question or this shift possible?
Thanks a lot, Shafat, for the introduction, for being here as our host today. Hello, everyone. And well, that's a great question to begin with. I think that for me, especially, my whole journey has changed to a better path, considering the exchanges I had within education. So rather it be at school, rather it be in informal spaces of education. And I think that necessarily any change that we do in society has to go through this. So kids should have the possibility, like every child should have the possibility to view the potency they have within themselves in some kind of educational space, whether it be their own families, whether it be community spaces, whether it be school itself, or other spaces within their surroundings. So I think that that's the main fact, because when we think about education, we're thinking about the way the world is presented to us. So when you first go to school, you're pretty much understanding how to behave in society and what to expect from society towards you. So you shape yourself considering those expectations. And if we keep on the same system in which education is just a way to professionalize yourself and continue on repeating this same methodological logic, then we're not going to change much. So whether it be within school or outside it, we totally need to give children the opportunities to access their changemaker abilities, considering that we have too many problems and we should not be so focused on our children having a successful professional life, because like that's not even possible if we don't have a planet to inhabit in the next decades. So we should totally feel like this co-responsibility as society to empower children, because we all need to be empowered to continue on existing as humanity in a more powerful manner. So that would be it.
Yeah, that's so powerful. The idea that education is the way the world is presented to us. And I love that absolutely. Christian, what about you? What do you think needs to happen in order for young people to start thinking of the problems they want to solve instead of a career path, for example?
Yeah, well, I think it's a brilliant mindset shift. And I was actually talking yesterday to Temple Grandin, who's a Ashoka Fellow here at Colorado State University, works in animal welfare. And it was interesting. She shared, for those of you that don't know Temple, she's on the autism scale and speaks very openly about that and the ways it's impacted her changemaker journey and the ways that she drives empathy. But the question she was asking me is, why is it that we have all of these students, if we were to use the analogy of a port and the boats, who are at port and who have loaded up their vessels and are waiting there and are not transferring and transporting into other realms and to take their passion and everything that they've learned and to apply it. And so honestly, when I think about that shift to what problem do you want to solve, it kind of reminds me of this larger shift that I'd like to see of not asking people, what have you accomplished, but whose hearts have you impacted? Whose hearts have you impacted and whose stories have you heard throughout your journey? And how well have you been able to tell those stories in a way that inspires others to move and to change? And I think it's sort of predicated on this idea that I would say there's no prerequisite to change making. There's no prerequisite to change making, right? That power is within. And I know one of the themes that, at least from my story, I mean, I have been inspired by folks with law degrees, but I wasn't initially inspired by someone with a law degree or a doctorate. I was inspired by someone with a dustpan and a broom. And their stories have empowered empathy into my story. And so I think it's finding that shift. And I'd also offer, and I know Mr. Bornstein, if any of you all have read his work around solutions journalism, I think even taking it another step and saying, not only what problem are we working to solve, but what solutions do we want to drive and who are the agents of change? And I think sometimes that's the mistake that we make, is we separate the issue from the architects who can solve it. Right. In this case, I think sometimes we forget that we're not only consumers of information, we're not only participants in the system, but we're designers. We can be designers. We can be architects, because ultimately, as Simon Sinek talks about, he's a leadership consultant and public speaker. He talks about this idea that the system is the collection of people. Sometimes it's easy to forget that, right? So if we can impact the way that people see an issue, if they can activate their empathy and their story, and the potential that they have directed towards solving a problem with meaningful solutions, that I think is the ultimate goal. That is what I'd love to see. And honestly, I mean, at its foundation, I think it's trusting that young people have that power and that they have that agency. And it also happens in the context of relationship, right? It happens at the speed of relationship, this idea of being known and helping others to feel known. that's when we can start to articulate our vision and our ideas. And ultimately, that's what brings to life so many of the questions that you're asking and what Nidria has highlighted there. So those are some of my thoughts. I'll pass it back to you, Scott.
No, thank you for sharing that. And what a powerful statement that we're not just part of the system, but we're the very people who designed the system. So why can't we change it? Why doesn't every young person believe in themselves to change that system? And yeah, I love that, Christian. Thank you for sharing. Vinny, I'm going to go towards you. What do you think about this narrative change? What do you think about a world where young people are almost, like Christian mentioned, looked at as architects of systems and designers of systems?
Yeah, well, I really love the way that Christian brings it for us. And I believe that what needs to change is our mentality, is basically that we created a chain problem that lasts for generations and reflect in a system that we are struggling today. And I really love when this question appears because there are so many professions that those don't exist yet. And so this question doesn't make any sense for our generation and for today. We just needed to create creative people with the capacity to solve problems for the century. And we are just in the beginning of 21st century. You can see about the challenges that will appear. Yeah, can you even imagine it? And what needs to shift is society to look at the potential of human behind each child, behind each young people, and that we needed to prepare people to solve problems that we don't know yet, because in this accelerate century, we are seeing changes happening so fast with this information in all the world, and yeah, we needed to shift our process in the schools because we still have schools of 19th century, teachers from 20th century, and students from 21st century. Can you see the challenge and the difference that we have? So investing in our schools methodology is strategic because we spend most of our life in that spaces, and there we started the journey to know more about the world and the system and about ourselves, And there is a phrase by Paulo Freire, a big educator, and my fellow countrymen, I love to say that says, if the structure does not permit dialogue, the structure must be changed. You can see the power of this phrase. If the structure does not permit dialogue, the structure must be changed. And in this simple moment that we are talking in this day, is being super important, our talk, and it has to affect also the decision makers in our society. And even more, we need to occupy spaces of decision makers, Yeah, we still have a society that doesn't support people who want to follow their passions. And we need to break this mentality and boost more people and demystify it, because your passion fit first, regardless what is it. Yeah, it's not like about that.
Yeah.
Shafat, do you mind if I jump in? I love the way that you phrase that in the sense of starting to distinguish between potential and capacity, right? In the sense of, you mentioned the 19th, the 20th, the 21st century, and there's many more after this. And I think the only way that we can secure a prosperous future that's solutions oriented to these age-old problems is for us to recognize that the change-making capacity of individuals is perhaps the most valuable quality that we can look for in a generation, right? Their ability to adapt to situations, and even if certain career paths or jobs have become obsolete, this spirit of change-making is a universal skill and will span the test of time. I'm certain of that. I just wanted to highlight that because the point you made is so crucial, I think, of not only helping folks to discover their potential, but to also have the capacity and the framework and folks in their lives who can support them in activating that power. Is that right, Vinny?
Yeah, I think Vinny's he's nodding for sure. I absolutely love that. And Vinny, I just want to draw out an insight that you shared about if you start asking people, what do you want to be when you grow up, 10 or 20 years down the line, that job doesn't exist. If you ask someone today and the young person says, I want to be a social media manager. 10 years ago, nobody said that, right? So now those conversations are starting to happen around problem solving and so on. So yeah, thank you for sharing the insights here. I just want to direct my next question towards Midria, because Midria, one of the key problems you have been addressing through your work is equity and racial justice in your community. Now, my question to you is, are you seeing that every young person, regardless of their background, has access to change making in your community? Or is change making only for a select few who have resources, education, and so on?
That's a great question. So when I think about my community, like I have several communities I'm a part of. So I'll look into my community of origin, which is like the place where I feel like mostly change making abilities are not put it on in practice, and like frame what I feel like it's still needed to be done there. And here actually, because I'm at my grandma's house now. But pretty much I feel like no, we don't have full access to our change maker abilities because we are still living under this very old narrative that we are supposed to just focus on our individual lives and our families, and like this unity of existence that doesn't exist alone. But we, like Hannah Arendt, she speaks a lot about it. Like we live under this perspective of bubbles, but those bubbles do not exist alone. We are like interconnected and interdependent on each other. And I feel like, especially for children, it's hard to access those abilities when we see our parents or grandparents, like our whole families, living under this system and reproducing this system. And they didn't have the access to their change maker abilities. They didn't have the chance to put them on practice. So how are we gonna feel like empowered to do this? So I feel like there's still a long path to be walked, and especially within schools and communitary spaces, like that's exactly where we'll find the possibilities, the opportunities to put those abilities in practice. Because for most of the time, we are just reproducing things. And I think that one big shift that came to me after having those, like those change-making opportunities within education, whether it be on school or in other educational spaces, was understanding that I didn't need to only reproduce society, but I could also produce it, as Christian said, about the matters of like, the system is made out of people, and I love anthropology. I studied in university, and if we know that ever since the beginning, like if you go to school understanding that you're part of a system that, yes, has been historically set up, but can also change Paulo Freire, I really recommend that you all get to know him. He's like the patronum of Brazilian education. And he used to say like that the word is not, the word is being. So the word is continuously being made, and we still don't have that figured out in much of the places where we go to get formed, like to get our proper education. And I don't think that we are getting proper education indeed. So and like opening space for solutions, just to finish up this contribution, I think that everyone who's watching, it's not only about my community, like it's about communities all over the world. So I don't know if you're in Europe or in Africa or in Asia, I don't know, I invite you to look after those spaces where change-making abilities are not being put in practice because people don't have the opportunities to do it, and try to speak to them and try to open space for this, because as Christian said, everyone can do it. like everyone can be a part of their community in a more empowered and transformative manner. So yeah, that would be it.
I'd love if Chef Vod, is it all right if I ask a quick follow-up question on that?
Of course.
Yeah, so I'm thinking, Midri, I mean, as you're sharing that, it's really interesting because I know you've shared about this before, right? In terms of your community of origin, right? And the I guess the nostalgia that you have with your community of origin, and also recognizing that sometimes it's inversely related, where the higher you climb in these international conversations and building relationships internationally, you've described sort of a distance that's being created between you and your community of origin. I'd love if you can maybe unpack that with us, and also sort of touching on this theme. I know I had said that there's no prerequisite to change making, but maybe we need to reframe that and say, like, there is an initial first step, right, for individuals to catch that. Like a good analogy, I saw a bald eagle the other day when we went up to the lake in the mountains, and it was up on this really tall tree, and it dropped into the air, and it started to rise and rise and rise, and you could see it catching the higher and higher currents. And I'm curious for you, Midriya, as you've climbed that, has it felt harder to reach your communities of origin and bring them up with you? And or what are those first steps that we need to provide in terms of resources to those communities?
Yeah, totally. Really appreciate that you touched on this, Christian, because like just to quickly share some thoughts about it, I feel like sometimes we tend to be recognized, like by our work, by what we're doing, by the impact of our initiatives, and we tend to be seen as individuals and not as collectives. And that's not an issue that only surrounds social entrepreneurs. That's not only about activism. That's that's the logic of the world where we live in. We tend to look at individuals. We tend to look at like, this person made something incredible, let's talk about it. And when we do that, we are not looking at the whole support system that this person had, and how the support system can be replicated, and how there might be many other people like this person, and not necessarily like this person, that might be other people who have their own journeys, their own passions, their own objectives, and that can do like even more to the world. So I feel like it's super important that when you look at somebody's work, you ask, like, and who else do you know who can do the same that you do, so that we can put our forces together and make even more greater impact. So I totally feel like it's hard to keep connected to our roots when we are seen only as individuals and not as collectives. And we need to shift that, like a word of collectives and not a word of individuals, because individualism is pretty much a huge part of the problem. And that's, like the bubble aspect that I mentioned before. And yeah, I totally think that we need to shift that. And again, like, coming back to my prior recommendation, if you go to somewhere and you're willing to create some space where people can actually put in practice that change maker abilities, don't look for a leader, look for leaders, like for co-leaders who can actually do it collectively, and who can actually think about the solutions in a horizontal manner, not in a vertical manner, because that doesn't work. That doesn't work anymore. And just to finish up, verticality and this individualist perspective, what they've put us through is what we're seeing now. Like, this whole crisis, it's based on those principles who don't serve us anymore. Sorry.
Yeah, oh my God, we could go on and on about this, and I just want to make sure that everyone, please feel free to put your questions in the chat. We're getting some questions already, and we'll address them at the very end if we can. But Vinny, I want to pull you in just slightly, because you've been mobilizing other young people to create new educational tools to engage young people in social issues in many schools across Brazil. What is the role that educators play in helping young people grow their change-making abilities? And given their current role, does the profession of being an educator need to shift as well? What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, one more good question. Well, I really believe that the teacher today is the facilitator of in the learning process. You know, our space in the school are not and shall not be like in the past with teachers who hold all knowledge. You know, and when this awareness came that we don't have all knowledge things, the things make more easy, you know, for everyone. And the access to information is showing us that our students are trainers too of our teachers. And we needed teachers with a teachable heart, you know, actually people in general, we need this teachable heart in schools spaces. And I believe it when teachers listen their students, and I believe that listen create intense connection between them. It is the key. It's open space to vulnerability and build bridges between people and the teacher and their students. And it is awesome to the school and for community in general. I believe the other step that the teachers and the role of teachers in the school process and the learning process is support them. And when the school community gives space for them to be who they are, a seed of change makers is being planted. And it happened in my life with my elementary school teacher. You know, she doesn't say to me, Vinny, you needed to be a change maker, but only giving me space for me to be who I am. And giving me this space, I discover myself in all this process. And the teachers today, the teachers' role today is to show us the possibilities. And then we will follow a way of autonomy that we will choose for our lives. Because what I will do if I don't know what I can do is the case, you know, in the school process with teachers that give space for us to be who we are giving space for these students. And there is another phrase by Paulo Freire that I really love it, that is more or less like education does not change the world. Education changes people, and the people change the world. There's a power thing here. And I believe that when we give space for people be who they are, we are creating and planting these seeds of change makers in our society. And I believe that it is the key for change in our world.
That's awesome. And how powerful of a framing even of an educator, right? An educator is not someone who's telling young people this is what you should know. They're simply a facilitator and a listener. And I think that's extremely powerful because a lot of our Ashoka community here, they care about education. They care about the role the educators play. So I would really encourage everyone to take that on into the work that you're doing and see how you can make a change in the spaces that you're in. And where I'm looking at time, and it's almost crazy that we've spent almost 30 minutes already. But Christian, I want to bring you in slightly here because through your work, you've been able to engage change across generations by bringing them together, right? So can you share some insights into the nuances of building intergenerational bridges and what maybe the key pillars are in doing that?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and maybe I should start by saying I need to find a Paulo Freire quote to start this off. But no, I do think, I mean, goodness, it's been empathy. It's been empathy, Shafat. It's this value that cuts across generations. It cuts across languages and geographic regions and cultures. And it's a unifier, right? It's a unifier. It's a bridge. This idea of empathy, seeing the best in other people, right? Seeing what they can become in their change-making power. Seeing other people not as competitors, but as allies, right? As co-leaders. And I think, I mean, going off of your point, Mitria, it's really interesting for those folks who live in the United States. I mean, we're a very individualist culture, a very competitive culture. And I would love to see more of this collectivism start to be restored and recognizing the power of shared community and the power of shared vision. And so that's something that I'd certainly love to fight for. And I think, I mean, this idea of intergenerational, it's interesting. Most of the custodial workers that I've interacted with throughout my journey have been over the age of 40, and many of them have spoken Spanish. And so that's been a real bridge for me to be able to reach and to hear their hearts and their stories, and to recognize that impact is not limited by age, right? Change making does not have an end time in your life, right? I mean, you could be 85 or 90 years old and still be a change maker. And I think also this idea of intergenerational, I think for me, it is standing alongside individuals who are older than you, I guess in my case, and recognizing that we are carving a better future for our kids and their kids and their kids. We are creating and perfecting a better future for the next 10 generations, right? And that's how I'd love for us to envision this, recognizing that there's a proverb that says we don't inherit the world from our ancestors, we borrow it from our children. And that's the vision change that I'd love to see, where we start to recognize that we don't know our beneficiaries. We don't know the beneficiaries of our work 2 generations from now, right? We don't know our successors, but I can promise you they know us. They will know us. And so the moment is now, I would say, for us to cherish the future welfare of generations. And I think change making is the way to do that. And I think empathy is the way to do that, to see other individuals for their capacity, for their heart, for their story. And I've talked about this theme a lot, and I mentioned it throughout my personal story. But at the end of the Custodian Service Initiative, after we had launched the program and I had built relationships with every custodian in my high school, and I was at my graduation party, and Robert Hugo, the night custodian, approached me, and he gave me a box. His little son, Julian, tapped me on the leg with a box, and I opened it, and it was a fountain pen. And I don't have it with me today, unfortunately, but he looked at me and he said, Christian, I just don't forget what we had together. Don't forget those moments that we had together. Don't forget the shared impact that we had and the stories that we were able to tell. And I just am thinking about it. I mean, how could I possibly forget Robert? He is foundational part of my story and helps me to discover empathy. Even though there's a generation dividing us, I found empathy through his story. And I carry that pen with me anytime I speak at conferences, and I raise it up at the end of my speech and I say, there are stories, and this isn't the actual pen, but I wish I had it. And I say, there's stories around us that we have yet to hear. Like, there are people around us that we have yet to hear. Is it the custodial workers? Is it the cafeteria workers? Is it the librarians or the auto shop workers or the folks who stock the grocery store? Who are those individuals who are integral to these systems of people that we're creating, and how can we elevate their stories? And I've seen empathy to be that bridge. So those are my thoughts, Shafat.
Yeah, that's extremely powerful. And I think, yeah, we all have hopefully a Robert Hugo in our lives who inspire us every day. I'm just going to quickly, I know we only have 10 minutes, so I want to address some questions from the chat. We have a question from Katerina, who is part of the Ashoka community and someone I adore dearly. She asked a question to Midria. So do you feel that the fact that it is harder for young people from certain communities to feel empowered to access their change-making capabilities is also a question of representation, basically? And as in, these young people don't see their parents, but also not any other people that perhaps look like them and have access to those capabilities. So it's a very fascinating question around representation. So Midria, any thoughts here?
Yeah, that's a great question. Thanks a lot, Katerina. And I'll take on what Christian has just said about people still needed to be listened to. Like the whole work that we have been doing in university, for example, it's centered on a poetry slam competition, and most of the people who participate on the poetry slam competition, whether it be as poets or just as the public or as jury, like, it doesn't matter, being there, they are mostly Black, indigenous people coming from peripheral contexts. And I think that that really shows the urge that people have to find common spaces to exchange. So I totally feel like representation is a huge matter, and not only representation in the sense of, oh, there are people there who look like me, and like, you know, the space feels more inclusive, but also there is a matter of, there are people there like me, and those people are changing the structures that have historically expelled us. So, for example, within university, like University of São Paulo, which is where I study, was founded in the 90s, in the 20s, sorry, and it was focused on the, you know, like the elite of São Paulo's, you know, like the rich people in São Paulo, who were like the owners of coffee farms, and like they're certainly not my ancestors. So I feel like there is this urge need to find spaces where we feel more comfortable, and we understand that there is openness to changing the structures. And I think that that comes from like this very firm and standout position of organizations, of institutions, of collectives, just really saying out loud, you know, like diversity is important to us. Like that's, you know, like if we don't exist in a world where diversity is actually cherished, then we are doing it all wrong, because like diversity exactly is what builds us as humanity. And one last thought I feel like is quite important is thinking not about this perspective of universal. Sorry, but you know, like universal word doesn't exist. A pluriversal word is what we should be looking forward to, because that's what actually exists. Like there are many perspectives around time, space, and culture, and we tend to leave under just one, which is the one that led us to where we are nowadays. So this pluriversal perspective is super important, and within this pluriversal perspective, we can find different people with different backgrounds, bodies, you know, like everything. So yeah.
Yeah, that's so powerful. The importance of representation and seeing someone who you can aspire to be is incredibly important in this space. And just another question here, and if I can pull you in, Vinny, this question is by Christina, and I think it's fascinating. She said, there is so much concern in the world today about the negative impacts of social media on young people. And yet social media can certainly play a positive role on shaping thoughts and impacting behavior. So can you, as a generation kind of born into the social media rich world, speak to how social media works and doesn't work for you? So Vinny, any thoughts here?
Yeah, I really love this question, and I'm working in an area that maybe some people can't see the power that we have in technology or games, for example, you know. And my goal today is to how we can utilize these tools like games, for example, that is in the student life, take it and make a pedagogical tool and bring it to the classroom, you know. My goal today is achieve it. And because in all the process and in this world, it's not take our students and turn them into gamers, but is take our gamers and turn them into students, you know. And I believe can fix it. And you can see the power that if we see our students, our like game designers, we are believing then that they can do something with games, for example, or with social medias, or with TikTok. And that is about believing in our students and the capacity that they have to change their reality with that tools, you know. And yeah, we have no doubts, many challenges to pass, you know, but I believe it more or less about that as in this way. I don't know if the answer, the question was, yeah.
And Christian, any thoughts here? What do you think?
Yeah, well, I mean, Vinny, I think you highlighted it, right? This idea of leveraging social media as a tool. And I also think it's important just for us to be honest about the forces that we're up against here, right? For those of you who have seen The Social Dilemma, incredible, go watch it if you haven't. It talks about how these algorithms are designed for division, right? And I'm of the mindset that disagreement is an opportunity for learning and growth, and division is a choice. And that's what is really challenging about the social media landscape is those algorithms are choices. Those are deliberate choices being made on the behalf of corporations. And so us as consumers need to combine our power and say, we want to see more solutions. We want to see more change making. We want to see more impact. We want to see more stories, not division, right? And so I think the challenge here is how do we convince these large corporations that the short-term sensationalism pales in comparison to this long-term impact that we could have, right? And ultimately, that's something we are the stewards of that landscape. And I do think it's a tool, absolutely. But I think that's also an important point to highlight. And I think that's what Bornstein has done as well, right? Of saying we need to shift the narrative in the interest of long-term sustainability and impact that's solutions oriented. But yeah, Vinny, I think everything you said is exactly right. And it's a great question.
Yeah, and just one last question. And Christian, I'm curious because you work a lot on issues like this, but how can you specifically create space for change making outside of educational systems? Like, is empathetic dialogue enough to change systems, or people are stuck within the systems they're born into? And this question is from Hannah.
Yeah, I mean, goodness, Midriya, so many of the points that you made resonate with me on this question, right? And in terms of diversifying how we see those initial steps of change making and realizing that our opportunity to find those higher currents of change making internationally should also be synonymous with bringing others with us. And so I do think it can happen outside of the education system. I think it can happen in any sector. And honestly, for me, what it is discovering the stories and the wisdom of stories, right? And I think that's a difference here, is that sometimes there's these qualifiers that we put on someone's right to be able to share their story. I think every individual has power in their story. They have power and change-making potential. It's just the question of, are we willing to listen, and do we have a curiosity to listen? And I do think that cuts across industries and across more than obviously just the education sector. And I think the actionable components here are listen, right? Listen to these problems that young people are describing, and let's find action that can keep the story centered. I think the challenge here is when we divorce the change maker from their ideas and their solutions, right? Or better yet, if we divorce the problem from the people who created a system. We are the architects who built systems. Why can't we reform them? Why can't we reimagine them? And if we understand that individuals are agents of change more than just responsive to problems. And I think that's a mindset shift that could lead to change in a lot of different sectors.
Awesome, and we're almost at time, so this is so rich. I just wanted to close with maybe one sentence that you want to leave our community with. So, Midri, I'll start with you. Any closing thoughts?
Yeah, I have one that I especially like to share, which is going on with Christian's thoughts and also the question that was put on the chat. I feel like it's super important that we see the diversity of possibilities that we have to change systems and also to build new systems. I think that's also something that we have to keep track on, to keep on track. So like, we're not going to change things just within the government structures, but not also only in the social entrepreneur field. We need to combine all those aspects, because that's how change is going to be made. Because we have those multiverses where things are happening, and we need to combine them to create a better multiverse. So just like keep on track that every space has its resources and its potency and its people, and we need to gather forces to do the change.
Thank you. What about you, Vinny? Any closing thoughts that you want to leave the audience with?
Yeah, I have here. Well, I believe that I just was thinking about this process of changes, about being change maker, and there is basically that our world is a body, and each person is a cell. You know, each children, young, my uncle, my mom, every person here is everyone is a cell, and each person has an important role to make the world as a body work perfectly. And yeah, I believe that we needed to support our young for they discover more about their identity. And that is what I would like to add
Yeah,
to close.
thank you. And Christian, what about you? Any closing thoughts?
Yeah, I would say, I think two things: to be the steward of the welfare of future generations, and to take that opportunity seriously. And then I think the other one is to discover the stories of other people, to discover the stories, and to never settle for shallow relationships. People are complex and they're inspirational, and they have insights and stories and wisdom. Seek it out from every person that you interact with.
Lovely. I want to thank everyone for sticking with us, and really, really appreciate the speakers for your time and wisdom. We do have a Community Connect session right after, so would encourage all of our Ashoka community members to join us in that session, and let's reflect together. But thank you for your time, and welcome to the ACMS. Bye, guys.